All right, thank you for staying with us. It's time now to take you around the world with Dane Waters. We're going to look at quite a number of issues. First, we have on our lineup the issues going on in Europe as we speak, French and the UK elections, the Russia war on Ukraine, or the Russian invasion, if you like, and of course all of the issues around NATO and all that's going on there on the show. Of course, this is Dane Waters, Around the World with Dane Waters. Dane Waters is on the other side. Hello, Dane Waters.
Good morning. Good morning. Great to be here.
Great. All right, so let's start with Europe and look at what's going on in French and United Kingdom. Of course, the elections there. The UK has a new prime minister, and he's beginning to speak. The other day was on the phone with the president of the United States of America, and you know, a lot is going on. Take us into all of that.
Well, I want to start the show by saying that we as a world are entering into the most difficult period we've ever been in. I mean, if you look at the elections that we've had this year, the world is divided really into the good guys and bad guys. No women are bad, so we just say good guys and bad guys, right? So so Russia's had stability because of their elections. President Xi of China, they've had stability because of their elections. There's stability in North Korea. There's stability in India. So if you look at what I would consider the bad and rogue nations, there's a lot of stability there. But what we're seeing in the free and democratic world, the US, UK, France, there's a lot of instability. And this is why I always like to make predictions, sadly, but that's why I think we're heading into a period of extreme uncertainty and possibility of global conflict and war, which none of us want. But let's look at each one of these components and talk about why this is possibly happening. You just had the elections in the UK. Keir Starmer of the Labour Party, they had the most, they have the largest percentage of votes ever, since 1832, I should say, in the UK. But the positive about that is the foreign policy so far of Labour seems to be consistent with what the Tories were, which is fine. But there's still a lot of uncertainty in the United Kingdom with their financial situation. Their austerity programs are going to have to happen. So that's going to have an impact as well. We'll talk more about that here in a second. But one of the benefits, if you look at this, is that in the UK elections, they have the largest number of women ever in the UK Parliament. They have the first female who's the Chancellor of the Exchequer, which is typically number 2 to the Prime Minister. There are a lot of benefits to the election. But if you look at the Tories, who are considered the more conservatives, there's a lot of internal fighting. The former Prime Minister Sunak, there's going to be a big leadership fight. So we'll see how that comes out. And then you have Nicholas Farage, who was considered the extremist, the far right, even though he only won 5 seats, which is 5 seats more than he had before. They are going to be a concern within the British government. And so we must watch to see how Farage and all of them, play together. But then we go across the channel into France. Macron had this big, he called these snap elections. People didn't know what was going on. Now, in theory, the Le Pens of the world, the far right there, have been relegated to 3rd place. But this is what the concern is there, is that you had three groups. You had Macron's coalition, which got the second most highest votes, and then you had the left-leaning Populist Front, which got the most votes. But what people aren't talking about is Le Pen's party got the most individual votes of any party, 125. And they went from basically 80 to 70 to 125. So the far right is far from being kicked aside in France. So we must watch that. But that's instability in France, from foreign policy to uncertainty about economic issues, will impact the world. And then in the United States, which we'll talk about a little later, but the U.S., there's a lot of instability there. So we have to look at what's happening. And all of this, and also you had European Union elections, which the far right took, not a majority of the seats, but they have a lot of seats. So in Europe, whether it's the UK, France, whether it's the European Union, and also you have, the last thing I'll say about this is that you have Orban, of Hungary, who is now the head of the European Union in the rotating presidency. I mean, it's a mess, and so this bolsters well for Putin and what he wants to do. And so I think Europe is on the threshold of possibly the precipice of another global conflict.
Let's stay with France. Looking at the results of the elections and how it's been difficult for any of the political parties to get a majority in the parliament. So what's going to happen? What do you see? How will the president, Emmanuel Macron, manage to appoint a new prime minister in the circumstance?
Listen, it's you know as you know it's a big unknown. But Macron, one thing I'll say about Macron, as far as a politician, he's masterful. So I mean, I'm sure he has some thoughts and plans on this. But I think what you'll have to see in order to get to 289, which is the majority, you're going to have a coalition government there, right? So if you Macron's has 143, so he has to get to basically another 150 votes. I think what you're going to see is that you're going to see a splintering of the leading vote getters. I think you're definitely going to see that the MPF, and I think that what Macron is going to do. The two biggest vote getters in the MPF, the two parties there. Neither one of those prime ministers, neither one of those individuals who lead those parties are supported by the people, and they won't work together. They don't even talk to each other. They just got together, honestly, to stop the far right from taking over. I think that Macron is going to try his best to keep his current prime minister there. He refused to accept the resignation of the current prime minister, and I think that he's going to try to work his magic to keep the prime minister there and not replace the prime minister with any of the heads of any of the other parties, because it's going to be very difficult for him to choose from the other coalition members, because once again they're very radical. You talk about the far right, they are the far left, and it just won't be advantageous, to France. So we'll have to see, especially with the Olympics coming up. As West Africans, you understand, France has been a very big player in West Africa, but I think that that's going to pull back even more because of what's happening. So we'll just have to wait and see.
All right, thank you very much indeed. This is Around the World with Dane Waters, who is an international political analyst. Let's move on now to the Middle East and look at developments there. Let's start with Iran and look at the fact that Iran now has a new president, a 69-year-old lawmaker who is a heart surgeon, a former health minister. He served under the previous reformist president of Mahmoud Khatami. The question will then be, what does this election of Iran, which is the second reformist president, the Masoud Pezeshkian, what does it mean for the politics of the Middle East?
The new president, Pezeshkian, I mean, listen, what's happening in Iran is once again, this is how all the dominoes fit together. We have to think about this, is that Russia has been depending a lot on Iran for their technology, for their missiles, just like they are in North Korea. This is a reformist president, but we also have to remember that the Ayatollah and the 12-member ruling party basically control everything. I mean, I know this reformist president, Pezeshkian, he wants to restart the nuclear talks, which I don't think America, well, if Biden loses, and we'll talk about that, as I said, if Trump wins, there'll be no restarting of any type of dialogue. But I'll make my prediction. I think Pezeshkian, if he goes too far out, I think he's subject to assassination. I hate to say things like that, but I do believe that if he does anything to forsake Russia, if he does anything to cozy up too closely to the United States, I think that he will be short-lived as president of the country, and we'll be looking at a new election there. And also, you have to look at what is he trying to do with the role of Iran with Hezbollah and the Houthis, and in Gaza. I mean, Iran has been the #1 benefactor of Hezbollah. And I do believe that Hezbollah is ready for war now. They're ready to go to war with Israel, and I think you're going to see that. I do believe that this new turn of events of Netanyahu to accept more leniency regarding the peace process with in Gaza, I think it's just so he can free up his troops to go to the border with Lebanon and to start a war there. So I think that the conflict there is going to grow, and I think Iran in the election there is going to be very critical to see what happens. But if once again, if Pezeshkian gets out of control and doesn't support the extreme aspects of the Iranian regime, I think that he will not be around very long.
Stay with Iran. The President Pezeshkian, during his campaign, said he was going to try to ease tensions with the West. From what you see, what are the possibilities? To what extent can he achieve this campaign promise of his?
Well, first of all, you define the West. If you look at the West as Europe, I think that this goes back to what we talked about a minute ago, with the uncertainty in the UK, the instability in France, and the Germans who, honestly, are under Scholz has not been as strong as they used to be, and the rotating presidency, of the European Union with Orban. I think it's going to be very difficult for Iran to restart negotiations with Europe. Now, I think when it comes to the United States, that door is closed until after the election. I don't see, with 4 months to go before the election, I don't see there be any opening or opportunity to discuss anything new with the United States. And Trump, once again, we'll talk about the election there in the next segment, but Trump is on his way to win. I just don't see any scenario in which Trump would normalize relations or allow for any type of normalization of the nuclear treaty. So I think even though Pezeshkian, even if he wants it, which he said he did, I don't see that there's any doors open for him to continue that conversation as of now.
Just mentioned the treaty because one of the things he also campaigned on was that he wanted to revive the 2015 deal, which is supposed to ensure limitations of its nuclear enrichment program, and of course in return for lifting of sanctions. What do you make of that as well?
I think one of the first caveats you're going to have to see is that, for the United States and for the rest of Europe are the primary countries, once again, the UK, France, and Germany, to restart discussions. I think one of the caveats is going to be that Iran has to stop providing arms to Russia. And this is going to be a dividing point. There's just no way. It'd be very difficult in America, speaking for, on behalf of the American government, that it'll be very difficult to restart negotiations with a country that's providing military support to Russia. So I think Pezeshkian and the Iranians are going to have to make the decision about whether or not they're willing to forsake Russia. Now, the problem is that Russia is giving nuclear technology to Iran. So once again, the Iranians, for any type of deal to be revisited, they will have to say that they agree to no longer take any type of nuclear support from the Russians. So there's a lot going on there. Now, if he were to say that, listen, we will forsake Russia, we will not deal with Russia in exchange for, reducing the sanctions, I think America and the world will be open for that. But he has to make a very clear delineation between supporting Russia and not.
All right. Let's take a break. When we come back, we'll look at, we'll move on to other countries around the Middle East and see what's going on, for example, in Israel and the issues going on right there against Israel and, of course, Palestine and all the other issues and the mix, Lebanon in the mix and all of that. We'll take all of that when we come back after this break.
Lagos has become one of the largest exporters of Forbidden ivory in the world.
Live in a third world nation where your votes will get stolen if you can vote there at all.
More news.
But the Chief of Naval Staff Vice Admiral Emmanuel Ogala says the nature of warfare is evolving rapidly.
More lifestyle.
With all this going on around the world, clothes are one item that no one can do without.
More business.
Let's look at the banking sector, where the aggregate non-performing loans of 9 banks increased to 814.08 billion.
More sport.
All right, fantastic day to you. It's going to be a special one for the Super Eagles.
More inspiration.
Speak no evil of any person.
Enjoy a little bit more of everything for the entire family. Silverbird Television. It's about entertainment and more.
Lagos has become one of the largest exporters of Canadian ivory in the world.
As a third world nation, where your votes will get stolen if you can vote there at all.
All right, thank you for staying with us. It's Around the World with Dane Waters, and we're looking at the political developments across various parts of the world. We've looked at Europe. We're looking right now at what's going on around the Middle East and all of the developments there. So let's turn our searchlight to the Israeli-Palestinian crisis and all of what's going on there. Just recently, the Israeli forces, struck southern Lebanon, and that again is making the whole thing look rather complicated, because of the involvement of Hezbollah and the attack and the back and forth. So, what do you see going forward in terms of the things to be done to de-escalate tensions over there?
Well, listen, how to de-escalate first of all, in order to de-escalate, you have to have leaders who are wanting to de-escalate, and that's number one. And you have Hezbollah. Listen, there's a large Lebanese population there in Nigeria. They're always curious and wondering about what's going to happen. And this is something I do want to get across, and we'll talk more about this here, about the actual issue in a second, is that people who are sitting in their living rooms, whether it's in Nigeria or Ghana or United States, they think about, why should these issues bother me and concern me? What's happening in Israel, what's happening in Gaza, what's happening in Ukraine. But, where we're heading is that, if we're heading to a global conflict, you are going to see massive insecurity and instability around the world, which will impact prices, will impact currency exchanges, will impact access to food, will impact, whether or not Nigeria can sell fuel and gas and oil. So all of these things, even though the problem we have around the world right now is most people think these things don't matter to me, but they do. And this is one thing I want to get across in the show, is how these different components, it will impact every single person on this planet. Now, specifically to the Middle East, we're living in a world where, you have Netanyahu, who is, listen, he's prime minister. As long as he's prime minister, he's not going to be prosecuted for what he's accused of as far as corruption. So maintaining conflict is very beneficial to him staying in power. And so I think that what you're seeing is in Gaza, for example, over 30,000 men, women, and children have been killed in Gaza. Listen, America and Afghanistan in 20 years, 18,000 civilians died in 20 years. In the Ukraine war, as of now, less than 10,000 civilians have been killed. But you look at 9 months of conflict in Gaza, where almost over 30,000 civilians have been killed. And, even if the best estimate is that, 8,000 of those are members of Hamas. So I think what you're seeing is that Netanyahu realizes that he cannot continue in Gaza. I mean, he's completely, totally devastated it. It's very critical to understand that he must take retribution for what happened on October 7th. That's very critical to understand. But he's trying to bring that to a close by opening up a greater dialogue with Hamas to find a solution. But many people argue that the only reason for that is because he's going to open up a new front, war with Lebanon. And you see that with daily exchanges between Lebanon and Israel, and they're getting more and more intense. And the other day or 2 days ago, you had an American who was actually harmed in one of the Hezbollah strikes. So what Netanyahu has asked for, as far as what to stop any conflict with Lebanon, is for Lebanon to move back to what they call the river, and they're not going to do it. So conflict with Lebanon is inevitable. But once again, the wild card is where is Iran and the new president going to come down on that? But Hezbollah can act on their own. They have enough weapons to do it. So my prediction that within the next 30 days, you're going to see a full conflict with Lebanon.
I'd like to speak on the UN looking at what's going on there and the interventions that we've had. For example, there have been quite a number of resolutions from the United Nations. How far Can the UN's intervention help in de-escalating crisis there?
My personal opinion is that the UN is not capable of stopping any conflict. I mean, I hate to say that. I think that if you look at the resolutions they passed, well, let's just fast forward to the West Bank discussion. I mean, the United Nations has made any settlements in the West Bank illegal since 1957 or whenever it was. I mean, Israel has always ignored that. I mean, there's never been, Israel has never been held accountable for, the settlements in the West Bank, and those are illegal under UN resolutions. Yet they continue to do it. You see your resolutions to bring an end to the war. You see other resolutions that the UN has passed, even dealing with the Ukrainian war and other conflicts around the world. But I think the United Nations, when it comes to ending conflict, is incapable of doing such. I think the United Nations has a role in supporting children and medical care and other issues and working on climate change, things that are non-lethal, I would say, because you can get consensus among the countries around the world. But I just sadly don't see that, no matter how many times Guterres is going to come out, the UN Secretary General, and say, I'm appalled by this, I'm upset about this is heinous, this is wrong, nothing's going to happen. The ICC has come out and said that, Netanyahu should be held accountable. It said that Hamas should be held accountable. It says so many things about war crimes, and nothing happens. So, unfortunately, I just think the UN, when it comes to global conflict, is not capable of bringing into any of these conflicts.
Well, that's quite unfortunate. All right, you're on to Around the World with Dane Waters, and we're looking at our political and military developments, of course, across various parts of the world. Let's switch gears now. Let's go to the US and look at what's happening in terms of the upcoming election, the November 4 election, 2024, right there. The questions about why the incumbent president, Joe Biden, has been adamant about and says he's committed to running in these elections. Questions about his health status and doubts about whether indeed he's seeing medical experts about some Parkinson disease, and how the State House, the White House press has tried to provide explanation to some of those, saying he is fit and indeed capable of running. So my question then would be, first, what do you think is the worldview for President Biden, particularly as he insists on contesting in this election?
Well, it's unfortunate what's happening to President Biden. I mean, listen, it's very tough being president of the United States. It takes a physical and emotional toll on anybody. I've been around several U.S. presidents. You can see how they clearly age over time. It's a very difficult job. And then when you take that and you combine it to running for president in the United States, and the difficulties and the how difficult it is on you physically to run for president of the United States. So you take those two things at the same time. An individual who's 80 years old, 81 years old, it's just impossible task. Listen, I personally believe that it'd be important for, let me just say this. What's happening is that the Democratic Party dividing, eating itself, eating its own. Where you have Biden now coming out emphatically saying, I'm staying in the race, while you have a growing list of prominent Democrats saying he shouldn't. This division is a gift to Donald Trump. This division makes it very clear that, it's why he's been unusually silent, because he's just letting the Democrats basically, as I said, eat their own. I was surprised to see how adamant Biden was that he is, not going to resign. But I think, on the one hand, politically speaking, I think it's important because, he's trying to bring, normalcy back to the campaign, saying, listen, I'm the nominee. Let's rally around it. Let's not be distracted by this. We have to stay, united. But I think you're going to see a fight at the Democratic convention. I think that, you're going to have, whether it's Kamala Harris or whether it's Governor Whitmer of Michigan or whether it's Governor Newsom of California, you're going to see a fight at the convention about the nominee. And I think that this is going to, once again, diminish the ability of the Democrats to get a cohesive message out. Trump is going to win. I think Trump's on to win. Even if they replace Biden right now, I think Trump is is heading to victory. So it's sad to see what's happening. I mean, once again, we have to remember that Donald Trump is only 3 years younger than Joe Biden. It's not like he's a spring chicken either. And he's, showing some signs of definitely some memory issues as well. But it's going to be a very difficult time in American politics.
Just before we go, I'd like you to speak on the Republican presidential nominee, Donald Trump, and his campaign, and what chances you think he has in this circumstance.
Listen, I think Donald Trump has a very strong chance of winning. I think the Supreme Court's decision about presidential immunity throws some of these lawsuits against him into question, especially cases down in Florida dealing with the national security issues, whether it's what he did with the paying off to silence the Stormy Daniels. I mean, so I think that listen, Donald Trump has been handed several gifts. The Supreme Court's decision about the January 6th rioters, the Supreme Court decision about presidential immunity, Joe Biden infighting with the Democratic Party. I think that Donald Trump is well on path to be the next president of the United States. But I will make this prediction as well. I think that the American public is so disinterested in what's happening that I think you will see the lowest voter turnout in American presidential elections since 1946.
All right, thank you very much indeed. Mr. Dane Waters is an international political analyst, and he's been taking you around the world today on the show. Thank you so very much indeed, and let's do this again same time next week.
Sounds good. Thank you very much.